Human beings are not purely rational creatures. While we pride ourselves on our ability to reason, analyze, and judge, our minds are deeply influenced by emotions, fears, biases, and unconscious mechanisms. Sigmund Freud, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, devoted much of his work to exploring these invisible forces. Among his many profound insights stands one quote that succinctly encapsulates a recurring flaw in human thinking. It is a predisposition of human nature to consider an unpleasant idea untrue, and then it is easy to find arguments against it. This quote exposes a psychological tendency. When faced with uncomfortable or painful ideas, humans instinctively reject them, not because they are false, but because they are hard to accept. Once rejected, the mind then constructs a scaffold of justifications and rationalizations to reinforce the denial. This essay will explore this Freudian insight in depth, examining its psychological basis, historical examples, implications in modern society, and the personal journey of confronting unpleasant truths. In doing so, we will see how this defense mechanism can both protect us and hinder our growth. 1. Freud and the unconscious mind. Freud's theories are built around the idea that much of our mental life exists outside of conscious awareness. The unconscious mind, according to Freud, is a repository of desires, fears, memories, and drives that influence our behavior without us even realizing it. One of the most important functions of the unconscious is to protect the conscious self, or ego, from psychological distress. To accomplish this, the unconscious employs defense mechanisms, tools that shield us from the full impact of painful emotions or truths. Denial is one such mechanism. When a person is faced with an idea or fact that threatens their self-image, worldview, or emotional stability, the mind may simply refuse to accept it. This is not a deliberate lie, but a genuine belief in an alternate reality that is more bearable. Freud observed that unpleasant truths often trigger this response. Rather than examining the idea critically, the individual dismisses it outright. And once an idea is rejected, the mind begins to justify its rejection with arguments, even if those arguments are weak, irrelevant, or false. The unpleasant idea becomes not only untrue, but unthinkable. Second, psychological foundations, denial and rationalization. Denial is one of the most primitive and powerful defense mechanisms. It operates at the level of perception, causing a person to literally not see what is in front of them. For example, a person who has just received a terminal diagnosis might insist that the doctors are wrong. In the face of overwhelming evidence, the denial persists because the truth is too devastating to accept. Closely tied to denial is rationalization. Once a person has dismissed an idea as untrue, they begin to find reasons why their dismissal is valid. These justifications often involve selective attention to facts, logical fallacies, or emotional reasoning. The goal is not truth, but comfort. Cognitive dissonance theory, developed by Leon Festinger in the 1950s, expands on Freud's ideas. It posits that when people experience inconsistency between their beliefs and actions, or between two conflicting beliefs, they feel psychological discomfort. To reduce this discomfort, they may change their beliefs, distort facts, or reinterpret evidence. This often means rejecting new information that challenges existing views. The implications of these mechanisms are vast. They explain why people cling to harmful behaviors, ignore scientific evidence, or resist change. They also highlight the difficulty of personal growth, which often requires confronting painful truths about oneself and the world. Third, historical examples of truth denial. History is replete with examples of societies and individuals rejecting unpleasant truths. The resistance to accepting these truths often has devastating consequences. Galileo and the heliocentric model. When Galileo supported the Copernican model of the solar system, that the Earth revolves around the Sun, he faced fierce opposition. The idea was unpleasant to the Catholic Church because it challenged the geocentric worldview rooted in Scripture. Rather than re-examining the evidence, the Church declared Galileo a heretic. It was easier to label the idea untrue than to accept its implications. Slavery in America. For centuries, many in the United States justified slavery with pseudo-scientific and religious arguments. The truth, that slavery was a brutal, dehumanizing system was too unpleasant for many white Americans to accept. Instead, they clung to myths of benevolent masters and contented slaves, and created elaborate ideologies to support the status quo. Climate change denial. In recent decades, scientific consensus has emerged about the human role in climate change. Yet many people, including influential leaders, have denied or downplayed the threat. The idea that our way of life is unsustainable and causing irreversible harm to the planet is deeply unsettling. As Freud predicted, people find it easier to argue against the science than to accept the need for drastic change. These examples show that the denial of unpleasant truths is not just a personal failing, it can be a collective one with far-reaching consequences. The role of ego and identity. Why do we resist unpleasant ideas so fiercely? One reason lies in the structure of the ego. According to Freud, the ego mediates between the desires of the ID, the moral demands of the superego, and the realities of the external world. It seeks balance and stability. Unpleasant truths threaten this balance. They create internal conflict, challenge our self-image, and force us to confront things we would rather avoid. For example, a person who sees themselves as morally good may find it intolerable to admit they have caused harm. Accepting this truth could lead to guilt, shame, or a crisis of identity. To avoid this, the ego employs denial. It reshapes perception, memory, and reasoning to preserve a consistent self-image. This is why personal change is so difficult. It requires the ego to let go of its defenses and face discomfort head-on. The same dynamic plays out at the group level. National identities, religious beliefs, and political ideologies often depend on simplified or sanitized versions of history. When these narratives are challenged, the response is often denial, outrage, or revisionism. The unpleasant idea is dismissed not because it is false, but because it is threatening. Contemporary examples: echo chambers and confirmation bias. In today's digital age, the tendency to reject unpleasant truths has been amplified by technology. Social media platforms, personalized algorithms, and partisan news sources allow individuals to curate their information environments. This leads to echo chambers, spaces where people are only exposed to ideas that confirm their beliefs. Confirmation bias, the tendency to favor information that supports one's existing views, plays a major role. When confronted with contradictory evidence, people often double down on their beliefs. They dismiss dissenting voices as biased, misinformed, or malicious. This creates a feedback loop in which unpleasant truths are not only rejected but vilified. Consider the rise of conspiracy theories. Many of these theories gain traction because they offer comforting explanations for complex or disturbing events. Believing that a secret cabal is behind world events may be more palatable than accepting randomness, incompetence, or systemic failure. In this way, the rejection of unpleasant ideas becomes a form of psychological self-soothing. 6. The cost of denial. While denial can provide short-term relief, it often leads to long-term harm. Ignoring medical symptoms can lead to delayed diagnoses. Refusing to acknowledge relationship problems can result in breakups. Denying societal issues like racism, inequality, or environmental degradation allows them to persist and worsen. At the personal level, denial can stunt emotional development. People who refuse to face their flaws, mistakes, or limitations may struggle with intimacy, accountability, and growth. True self-awareness requires the courage to face the parts of ourselves we would rather ignore. At the societal level, denial impedes progress. It prevents honest dialogue, hinders problem-solving, and fuels polarization. It also creates an environment where truth becomes subjective and facts are treated as opinions. This erosion of shared reality is dangerous for democracy and social cohesion. 7th, embracing unpleasant truths. A path to growth. Despite the discomfort it causes, facing unpleasant truths is essential for personal and collective growth. It allows us to learn, adapt, and evolve. The first step is acknowledging our tendency to reject such truths. Mindfulness practices can help individuals become more aware of their thoughts and emotions without immediately reacting to them. Therapy and self-reflection can uncover unconscious defenses and foster greater self-acceptance. Education that emphasizes critical thinking, empathy, and intellectual humility can equip people to engage with complexity and ambiguity. Leaders and institutions also have a role to play. Creating spaces where dissent is welcomed, mistakes are acknowledged, and learning is prioritized can counteract the culture of denial. Transparency, accountability, and compassion can help bridge the gap between reality and perception. Ultimately, the goal is not to eliminate discomfort, but to build resilience. As Freud understood, the mind's first instinct may be to reject unpleasant ideas. But with effort, support, and courage, we can move beyond denial and toward a deeper, more honest understanding of ourselves and the world. Sigmund Freud's observation about human nature remains as relevant today as ever. It is a predisposition of human nature to consider an unpleasant idea untrue, and then it is easy to find arguments against it. This tendency is deeply embedded in our psychology, driven by the need to protect the ego from pain. It manifests in individual lives, historical events, and modern information ecosystems. But denial is not destiny. By understanding this mechanism, we can begin to challenge it. We can learn to recognize when we are turning away from uncomfortable truths, and instead turn toward them, not because they are easy, but because they are necessary. In doing so, we become more authentic, more compassionate, and more capable of facing the complexities of life. The path to truth is rarely comfortable, but it is the only path that leads to freedom, growth, and genuine understanding.